There are exactly three things in this world that have ever made me feel genuinely powerless. The first is gravity, which I discovered at age 7 when I tried to fly off my grandmother's garden wall with a pair of cardboard wings. The second is the concept of compound interest, which my bank seems very enthusiastic about and I remain deeply suspicious of. And the third, most infuriating, most persistent, most completely inexplicable thing that has ever made me feel like I am standing barefoot in a field with no idea which direction leads home is Tyler Stokes. He started at Meridian Creative Solutions 14 months ago. I had been there 3 years by that point, 3 years of knowing exactly where I stood, exactly who I was in that building, exactly how my mornings would go. I was the guy who brought the good coffee on Fridays. I was the guy who remembered birthdays without checking the shared calendar. I was the senior copywriter who had a reasonable reputation for being both competent and easygoing, and that combination had served me very well. Then Tyler Stokes walked through the glass doors with his stupid structured jacket and his stupid careful posture and his stupid habit of reading the room before he spoke like every word he said was being submitted for peer review. And suddenly I was the guy who could not stop noticing him. That is the condensed version. The version I tell myself when I want to sound like I have some self-awareness. The fuller version is messier and considerably more embarrassing. Tyler was hired as the creative director for the new brand strategy division. He sat 3 desks away from mine in our open plan office, which meant I could see him at a slight angle without obviously staring. I discovered this on his first day and immediately resented the architectural decisions of whoever had designed our workspace. He was tall in the quiet way that certain people are tall. Not in a way that demanded you notice it, just in a way that made you aware of the geometry of a room shifting slightly whenever he entered. He had dark hair that he wore short on the sides and longer on top, and he had the kind of jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone with opinions. His eyes were a very specific shade of brown that I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to identify. Not warm brown, not flat brown. Something with depth to it, like good wood grain or dark amber held up to indirect light. I noticed all of this the way you notice something that is going to become a problem. He introduced himself to the team on that first Monday with exactly the right amount of professionalism and exactly the right amount of warmth, and I sat at my desk thinking, oh no. The oh no was not because I found him attractive. I have found people attractive before. I am 31 years old and I have a reasonably functional understanding of my own preferences. The oh no was because something about him immediately made me want to needle him, made me want to press against whatever composed, considered exterior he was presenting until I found the softer thing underneath, made me want a reaction from him in a way that I could not cleanly explain or categorize. That instinct has defined the past 14 months of my professional life. It started small. I would submit project notes with a slightly more flippant tone than necessary, just to see if his responses would crack. They did not. He would reply with the same careful, substantive commentary, regardless of how breezy I was, and that drove me absolutely up the wall. I would make little jokes in meetings that landed slightly sideways of professional and watch him from the corner of my eye for a twitch, a press of the lips, a flicker of irritation. Sometimes I got a twitch. Sometimes I got nothing. The nothing was worse. The nothing meant I had not found the edge of him yet. My coworker and closest friend at Meridian, a woman named Dana Park who ran our social media strategy and had an uncanny ability to diagnose interpersonal dynamics the way other people read weather, pulled me aside about 2 months into Tyler's tenure and said with the directness that I had always admired and occasionally found catastrophically inconvenient, "You are behaving like a 12-year-old who has a crush and does not know what to do with it." "I am sparring with a colleague," I told her. "He does not know you are sparring with him. That is his problem." Dana gave me the look she reserved for situations where she had been correct and both of us were aware of it. "Kurt, sweetheart, either do something about it or develop a new hobby." I did not do something about it. I also did not develop a new hobby. What I did was continue the low-grade project of trying to get Tyler Stokes to look at me like I had genuinely surprised him, which occupied far more of my mental real estate than I would like to admit. Here's the thing about Tyler, though. The thing that made this so much more complicated than a simple crush, more complicated than simple admiration or simple irritation or any one feeling I could have neatly filed under a label and moved on from. He was good at his job in a way that made me want to be better at mine. He had this way of looking at a problem from an angle that nobody else in the room had considered, and presenting it not as a revelation, but as a natural observation, Of course. Like the answer had been sitting there waiting and he had simply been polite enough to introduce us to it. He never made anyone feel small for not having seen it first. He was generous with credit in a way that was not performative. He stayed late on the nights when a deadline was pressing, and he brought things with a shared snack basket without announcing it. I watched all of this with the quiet intensity of someone who was building a case they were not sure how to use. The most honest version of everything I am about to tell you is this. I had been in love with Tyler Stokes for approximately 11 of the 14 months he had worked at Meridian Creative Solutions. The other 3 months I was in deep, devoted denial. Even the denial was, in retrospect, a kind of loving. You do not deny something that does not matter. But love, as I have always experienced it, does not arrive in me wearing a name tag and carrying a welcome basket. It arrives sideways, dressed as something else entirely, and by the time I recognize it for what it has already rearranged all the furniture. So by the time our annual office holiday party rolled around, I was a man with a problem, a very specific and self-inflicted problem, and a very limited understanding of how to address it with anything resembling grace. I chose instead to address it with address. It started with a comment. 3 weeks before the party, we were in one of our bi-weekly cross-department meetings, the ones where creative and strategy and brand were supposed to align, which in practice meant 2 hours of everyone talking past each other while someone from accounting watched from the corner with the expression of the person who had long since given up. Tyler was presenting the new brand positioning framework for a client campaign we had been developing together, which meant his slides were on the big screen and I was sitting directly across the table from him, which was the seating arrangement most likely to cause me problems. He was walking us through the visual identity proposals, color palettes, typography, tone of voice references, clean, thorough, organized. The room was engaged. Even the accounting person had uncrossed their arms. And then he got to the section on the campaign launch event, which was going to include some kind of elevated cocktail experience, and he said something about the overall aesthetic being polished and restrained. I do not know why that landed the way it did. Polished and restrained is a perfectly reasonable design direction. It is a professional assessment. There was nothing in those words aimed at me specifically, and yet something about the easy confidence with which he said them, something about the way he smoothed the phrase out, like it was obvious and settled and beyond debate, lit a small fire somewhere in my chest. I said without entirely meaning to say it out loud, polished and restrained sounds like a way of saying nothing interesting is allowed to happen. The room shifted. People looked at me, then at Tyler, doing the invisible math. Tyler turned his eyes toward me with that particular quality of attention he had, the kind that made you feel both seen and evaluated at the same time. There was a pause, not a hostile pause, but a considered one. Interesting and chaotic are not the same thing, he said, in a tone that was measured and perfectly civil and somehow still managed to feel like a door closing. And there it was, that door, that quiet, composed, infuriatingly unruffled door. The meeting moved on, but I sat with it. I sat with it the way you sit with a splinter. You cannot quite reach aware of it, constantly turning it around in your mind during lunch while walking home, while lying in bed staring at the ceiling at 11:30 at night, polished and restrained. Interesting and chaotic are not the same thing. He had basically, in the most dignified possible way, told me that I was the chaotic option, the unpolished one, the one that needed to be reined in. That is what I told myself. That is the story I constructed, in the way that people who have feelings they are not ready to name will construct any alternative story that lets them stay safely in motion. 2 weeks later, Dana mentioned the office holiday party. Meridian did these things properly. Venue rental, catering, a photographer, a playlist curated by someone who took the playlist very seriously. Smart casual was the dress code that came through on the internal calendar invite. I had already been planning to wear the gray suit I wore to every event that called for smart casual. The gray suit was fine. The gray suit was reliable. The gray suit was polished and restrained. I stared at my wardrobe on the evening I was supposed to be planning my outfit, and I thought about Tyler Stokes saying interesting and chaotic are not the same thing in that voice with that expression, like he had already categorized me and found a perfectly appropriate drawer to put me in. Something shifted. It was not a rational shift. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that what happened next was the product of careful reasoning. It was not. It was the product of 14 months of accumulated feelings I had nowhere to put, filtered through wounded pride and a very specific kind of desperate bravery that only shows up when you are out of better ideas. I was going to wear a dress. Not because I had never worn one. I had actually a few times in my life in contexts that were not professional, and I had found it to be exactly as interesting and exactly as unremarkable as I chose to make it. Not because I thought it would shock everyone. Our office was not that kind of office. The culture at Meridian ran toward the expressive end of the spectrum. We had a pride flag in reception and a policy that was 5 pages long on fostering a creative and affirming workplace. And nobody there was going to have a professional meltdown over a man in a dress. But Tyler was precise. Tyler was composed. Tyler had looked at me across a conference table and categorized me efficiently and without visible effort, and I wanted to find the edge of that composure so badly that I had apparently decided to blow a small hole in my own professional dignity to do it. I wanted him to look at me and not have a category ready. I wanted to be something he had not already arranged. Dana, when I called her at 9:30 that evening and told her the plan, was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "This is either the most self-sabotaging or the most self-aware thing you have ever told me, and I honestly cannot tell which. I need help finding something to wear," I told her. Another pause. "Fine, but you are not wearing anything shapeless. If you are going to do this, you are going to do it properly." We went on a Saturday, 3 days before the party. Dana had a very clear vision and I had very little resistance left to offer. The dress she found was midnight blue. The kind of blue that reads as almost black in low light, but catches the light differently when you move. It had a fitted bodice and a skirt that fell to just below the knee, with a slight flare at the hem that moved when I walked. The neckline was a modest V, not theatrical, not trying too hard. The fabric was some kind of heavy crepe that held its shape without being stiff. I tried it on in the small dressing room and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. I looked, I thought, like a specific kind of trouble. The proportions worked in a way I had not expected. The flare of the skirt balanced my shoulders. The neckline cut a clean line. My height helped. I'm nearly 6 feet tall and the dress read differently on my frame than it would have on someone shorter, with a kind of deliberate architecture to it. Dana appeared at the curtain, and I pushed it aside to show her. She looked at me for 5 full seconds without speaking. Then she put one hand over her mouth, not in distress, but in the particular way people cover a smile when they are trying to be fair and failing. "Tyler Stokes," she said, not as a question, "is going to completely lose his mind." "That is the goal," I told her, and tried to believe that the fluttery sensation in my chest was anticipation rather than terror. We found shoes that worked, simple black heels at a height that I could manage without looking like I was learning to walk for the first time. I practiced at home the following 2 evenings, walking circuits around my apartment in the dress and shoes, while my cat, a gray tabby named something embarrassing that I am choosing not to include in this account, watched me from the arm of the sofa with the serene indifference that cats maintain toward all human folly. By the night of the party, I was ready, or I had done everything that could constitute readiness in the absence of the real kind. The venue was a converted warehouse space that a catering company had rented and decorated, with the kind of moody, warm lighting that made everyone look slightly better than they did under fluorescent office light. There were tall tables draped in dark linen, a bar along the far wall, a cleared space that would become a dance floor later in the evening when people had sufficient encouragement, and a catering spread that looked genuinely impressive. I arrived 12 minutes after the official start time, which I had calculated as late enough to be noticed entering but not so late as to suggest I had been avoiding the thing. I had a coat over the dress, though the night was not particularly cold, because I wanted the reveal to be a reveal and not something I diluted by arriving bundled up and having to explain the layers. Dana was already there. I could see her near the bar in a deep green wrap dress, and when she spotted me coming through the door, she raised her glass in a very subtle salute. I took off the coat. The room did not stop. It was not that kind of moment. There was no record scratch silence, no dramatic pause while everyone turned. What happened was more granular than that. A few nearby people registered the dress, and there were some quick glances, some small recalibrations, a few genuine smiles. My coworker from the design team, a man named Marcus who I liked very much, said simply, "Kurt, that is a look," with the warmth of someone who meant it as a compliment. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, and started toward the bar. I was doing inventory of the room as I moved through it, which is a habit I have always had at social events. Note exits, note people I want to talk to, note the general temperature of the gathering. I was doing all of this while also performing a very specific kind of casualness that required approximately 40% of my available concentration. I did not see Tyler immediately. Then I did. He was near the windows on the far side of the room, standing with two people from the strategy team. He had his glass in one hand and he was half turned toward the window, and even at that distance he had the same quality he always had of being entirely present in the space he occupied, not scattered, not performing, just there. He was wearing charcoal trousers and a dark shirt with the collar open, and he looked, in the honest and entirely inconvenient part of my assessment, exceptionally good. I got my drink. I talked to Marcus and to a few other people doing the normal party things, the small talk, the asking after weekends and holiday plans, the laughing at things that were mildly funny rather than very funny because the social contract of office parties demands a slightly elevated laugh threshold. I was doing all of this with the competence of someone who had been doing it for years, but I was tracking Tyler, not constantly, not in any way that I hoped was visible, just with the peripheral awareness that I had long since stopped trying to turn off. He had turned back from the window at some point while I was talking to Marcus, and I was quite certain, from the slight angle of his posture, that he had seen me. I did not look directly at him. This was the plan. Do not look directly at him. Do not give him the satisfaction of watching you. Watch him for a reaction. Let the dress be the thing, and let him have whatever his private experience of it was, and continue to exist in the room with the easy confidence of someone who had not spent 2 evenings practicing in heels. I got a second drink. I found Dana. "He's seen you," she said into her glass without moving her eyes toward him. "I know. He went very still." My heart did something I refused to dignify with a name. "Good. Kurt," Dana said, in the particular tone she used when she was about to say something I would need to sit with. "Very still is not the same as annoyed." I did not respond to that. I took a sip of my drink and turned to talk to someone from finance who had appeared at Dana's elbow, and I tucked Dana's observation into the back of my mind where I could ignore it until it became unavoidable. Here is what I expected to happen at that party. In the fantasy version I had played out in my mind during those 2 evenings of apartment circuit walking, Tyler would see the dress. His composure would crack, some small but visible fracture. He would come over, probably while pretending he was coming over for some other reason, and he would say something pointed, something about professionalism or appropriateness or the image we presented as representatives of the company. I would respond equally pointedly about the right to self-expression and the company's own stated values around creative freedom. We would spar properly in a way that felt like a real conversation between two people who were not operating behind glass, and maybe at the end of it there would be something slightly less like a closed door. Here is what actually happened. Tyler Stokes did not come over. He did not say anything pointed. He did not comment on the dress or on my presence or on anything related to me for the entire duration of the party. He spoke to other people. He was, as far as I could observe, entirely normal with everyone else in the room, which is to say quiet but engaged, attentive, occasionally breaking into the small and very private-looking smile that he deployed when something genuinely amused him. He just did not speak to me. I told myself for the first 40 minutes that this was coincidence. We were moving in different orbits in the room, the party had a natural flow to it, it was easy to not cross paths. Then I noticed that he was very specifically not crossing paths with me, not in an obvious way, not in a way that anyone else would have necessarily registered. But I knew this man's habits in a room well enough by now. I knew how he moved through social spaces, the kind of quiet circulation he did, the people he made a point to check in with. He was doing all of that. He was talking to our department head, laughing with the catering team coordinators, making the full careful rounds that a person in his position makes at an office party. He was just carving a very precise orbit that did not include me. About an hour in, I found myself at the catering table at the same time as him, both of us reaching for something from the same spread. And it was close enough that acknowledgement was the only natural thing. He looked up. His eyes met mine. And for just a second, one single unguarded second before whatever discipline he ran on reasserted itself, his expression did something I could not name. It was not irritation. It was not amusement. It was something with more weight to it than either. Something that moved through his face like weather moves across a landscape, present and then gone before you can fully read it. "Kurt," he said. "Tyler." And that was it. He took a small plate of something and moved back toward the group he had been standing with, and I stood at the catering table holding a napkin I did not need, and feeling like the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left. That one word, my name, exactly the tone he always used, the careful, neutral one, and yet somehow entirely unlike it. I stood there long enough that Dana materialized at my elbow. He said my name, I reported. Just your name? Just my name. Dana made a sound that was not quite a word, and then nothing. Another one of her silences. Kurt, she said eventually gently, what exactly are you trying to accomplish tonight? I wanted to give her a smart answer. Something about pushing back against the composure, the closed-door routine, the easy categorization. I had answers ready for most questions. This one sat in my chest and would not come up cleanly. I don't know anymore, I admitted. She put her hand briefly on my arm. Maybe that is the more honest place to work from. The party continued. I stayed until the playlist shifted to the slower, later night songs that signaled things were winding down. Tyler left about 20 minutes before I did. I watched him say his goodbyes, short and genuine. The same way he said them every time. Not performative, not rushed. He glanced in my direction once as he was leaving. Just once. A quick glance across the room, and then he was at the door. And then he was gone. I drove home in the dress, the heels kicked off, and sitting on the passenger seat. And I thought about that glance and about one word in a neutral tone and about the strange, quiet weight of his absence in a room he had spent an hour carefully not being near me in, and I felt something I could only describe as thoroughly, completely lost. Not in a bad way, or not only in a bad way. Lost in the specific way that means the map you were using was wrong, and you are only now beginning to understand the actual territory. I will compress the following 4 days because they were largely internal and largely uncomfortable and largely compunctive of me staring at my work screen while the back half of my brain ran an ongoing analysis of a single evening. I went over it in fragments. The way he had gone still when he first saw me, according to Dana. The orbit he had carved. The single word at the catering table. That look as he was leaving. I had worn the dress to annoy him. I was now nursing the persistent, unsettling suspicion that I had not annoyed him, that he had gone quiet not because he was irritated or dismissive, or had filed me efficiently into a new category labeled insufferable, but for some other reason entirely, some reason I was only beginning to allow myself to consider, because considering it required me to also consider what I would do with it, and I did not have an answer to that part yet. Tyler, for his part, was at work on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and was entirely normal. He was professional in meetings. He responded to my work-related messages with the same careful clarity he always brought. He was, as far as any professional observer could tell, completely unaffected by everything. I was not completely unaffected by everything. On Wednesday evening, I was at my desk 15 minutes after most people had gone home finishing a client brief that I had been half concentrating on all day. And I became aware that Tyler was still at his desk across the office. We were nearly alone. The cleaning crew was doing something in the kitchen. One of the junior writers was packing up by the elevators. I heard him get up from his desk. I did not look up. I heard him stop. Kurt, he said, the same tone, careful, neutral. And yet, I looked up. He was standing in the middle of the open plan floor about 10 feet from my desk with his jacket over his arm and his bag on his shoulder, and an expression that, for the first time in 14 months of careful observation, I could not locate within any of the categories I had built for him. He looked like someone who had been working something out and had arrived at a conclusion and was not entirely sure he was ready to say it out loud, but had decided to do it anyway. My heart, very unhelpfully, was doing several things at once. Tyler, I said, and I tried to make it as neutral as his. He came the rest of the way to my desk and stopped at the edge of it, and I looked up at him from my chair and waited. I should have said more than your name at the party, he said. I waited. He set his bag down, not sitting, just releasing the weight of it. I did not say more because I could not. At that moment, I could not work out how to construct a sentence that was both honest and appropriate, and I did not have enough of either one to offer separately. The office was very quiet. Outside the windows, the city was doing its ordinary evening business. What was the honest version? I asked. He looked at me in that way he had, the full attention of him, the kind that always made me feel like I had asked a question that deserved a real answer. You looked extraordinary, he said. That is the honest version. And it was not what I expected to be dealing with at a professional event, so I had to deal with it privately instead. My mouth opened. I closed it again. I was experiencing the specific sensation of getting what I had wanted and finding that it required a completely different response than the one I had prepared. I was trying to annoy you, I said, because apparently honesty was contagious. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. I know. You have been trying to get a reaction from me since approximately your third week of knowing me, he said, without heat, without accusation, just with the careful precision he brought to everything. I noticed. The clean floor of all my assumptions dropped out from under me. And you never gave me one, I said. No, he agreed. Because the reaction I had was not a professional one, and the reactions I am not sure are professional I tend to not share. There was a quality of stillness in the air between us that I associated, in my limited experience, with moments just before something changed. What kind of reaction was it? I asked. Another pause. He looked at me steadily. The kind that makes it difficult to think clearly, he said. The kind that has been making it difficult to think clearly for quite a long time now. I pushed back from my desk and stood up, because being looked down at while he said that felt suddenly like the wrong arrangement. We were close now. Maybe 4 feet of empty air between us. I have been in love with you. I said, which was not what I had planned to say, and was also, I realized as I said it, the most accurate sentence available to me. For the better part of a year. And I have had absolutely no idea what to do with that, so I spent most of it trying to annoy you instead. Tyler stared at me. For the first time in 14 months of watching this man operate with composure in every situation I had put him in, he stared at me with visible, unguarded blankness. The blankness of someone whose prepared responses had simply stopped loading. Then, slowly, something else replaced it. Something that started at the corners of his eyes and moved into the line of his mouth, and transformed the geography of his face into something I had never seen before. Something warm and slightly undone, and very, very real. That, he said, is the most inadvertently romantic self-report I have ever heard. I specialize in accidental romanticism, I told him. It is an underrated quality. The smile arrived in full. It was different from the small private smile I had cataloged over 14 months. This one was not contained. This one had edges. He crossed the remaining distance between us and I stayed still, and he stopped close enough that I was acutely aware of the warmth of him, of the particular way the office light fell across his face when he was this near. The dress, he said quietly, was spectacular for the record. I know, I said. I wore it for you. You wore it to annoy me. Yes, I agreed. For you. He looked at me for another moment with that warm, undone expression. And then he said, "Can we try this differently? Can we try it like 2 people who are being honest with each other instead of like a man who is poking a wall to see if it will fall down?" "That depends," I said. "Are you saying the wall fell down?" "The wall," Tyler said with a quality of quiet certainty that settled something in the center of my chest, "fell down the first time you sat across a conference table from me and said something so pointed and so exactly right that I had to spend the rest of the meeting pretending I had not noticed." I thought back through every meeting we had ever shared and tried to identify the specific moment he was referring to, and found that I could not because there had been too many of them. Too many small collisions and careful near misses. "Which time?" I asked. "The very first one," he said. "Your second week. You told the client that their brief was aspirational in the best possible sense, meaning it aspired toward things that would require them to become a different kind of company to achieve. And then you said, essentially, whether that company is who they wanted to be was the question worth answering first." I remembered that, dimly. I had not thought about it again after the meeting. "I said that to the client," I told him. "Not to you." "I know," he said. "You are not trying to impress me. That is why I noticed. There is a thing that happens when the story you have been telling yourself is peeled back, and you see that the story underneath is larger and has been running longer and is more real than the one you were narrating. It is not comfortable exactly, but it is the kind of discomfort that feels like relief, like setting something down that you had convinced yourself was not heavy. I am going to say something now," I told him, "and I am going to ask you to receive it without analyzing the delivery." "I will do my best," he said. And there was something in his tone that was almost gentle. "I have missed talking to you every time we have been in the same room and not talked to each other. And I have spent a year trying to make you see me through the wrong door, because I did not know how to find the right one. And I would very much like to stop doing that." Tyler was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty. "There was never a wrong door," he said. "There was just the one you were at, and I did not know how to open it from my side either." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture so simple and so careful that it stopped the breath in my throat for a half second. His fingers barely grazed my temple and then withdrew. "Can I take you to dinner?" he said. "This weekend, not as colleagues, not as an office thing." "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." "Wear whatever you like," he added, and there was a warmth in those 4 words that was new and precise and very specifically for me. "I might wear the dress," I told him. "Please do," he said, and the smile was back, and it was still warm at the edges, and it was entirely directed at me. I did not wear the dress to dinner. I wanted to, but I wore instead a white shirt with a mandarin collar that I liked very much, and dark trousers, and I met Tyler at a restaurant he had chosen, small and not flashy, with the kind of lighting and the kind of menu that meant the point was the conversation rather than the setting. He was there before me, which I had not expected. He was sitting at a corner table with a glass of water and no phone in his hand, which told me everything about the kind of person he was when he was not performing anything. Waiting without looking busy, just waiting. He saw me come in and stood, which was a small gesture and also made my heart do the embarrassing thing again. "Hi," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "Hi," he said. And that one word sounded nothing like the careful neutral of our professional life together. It sounded like something he meant. We talked for 3 hours. I know that is where you might expect me to summarize or condense or present the curated highlights, and I am going to resist that impulse, because the truth is that those 3 hours resisted curation. They were not elegant. They were not perfectly paced. We talked about the jobs we had had before Meridian and the reasons we had left them. We talked about what we liked best about the work we did now, and what we found frustrating about the industry we were in. We talked about things outside work entirely, music and the experience of traveling alone, the books that had changed how we thought about something, the particular pleasure of a meal cooked slowly when you had nowhere to be. Tyler talked with the same care he brought to everything but without the professional filter, which meant the care was warmer, less contained. He asked questions the way he did in strategy sessions, genuinely wanting the answer, genuinely listening to what arrived. He laughed more than I had heard him laugh before, a real laugh, one that sat in his chest rather than just his face. I learned that he had always been slightly reserved, not cold. He was precise about the distinction. But he found large social situations draining in a way he had worked around by becoming very good at them without particularly loving them. I learned that the careful composure was real, but it was also a learned layer over something less certain underneath. I learned that he had noticed me on his second day, not his first, because on his first day he had been too focused on the work to register much else, and on his second day I had come in with a good coffee and given a cup to everyone in a 3-desk radius without making any particular ceremony of it, and he had thought that is someone worth knowing. That is someone worth knowing. He had thought that on his second day. I had spent 14 months constructing elaborate schemes to get his attention, and he had known on day 2. "You could have said something," I told him. "So could you," he pointed out. "I was saying things constantly. I was a constant stream of things. You were sparring with a wall," he said. "That is different from talking to a person." He was right. He had been right about most of the things he had said to me in that empty office on Wednesday evening, and I was finding that being right was something I could love about him rather than something I needed to combat. After dinner, we walked for a while. The evening was mild enough, and neither of us wanted the night to end, which we communicated through the mutual agreement to keep moving rather than stopping and saying goodnight. We talked about the party. "When did you figure it out?" I asked. What the dress meant. He thought about it, which he always did, not performing deliberation, but actually taking a moment with the question. "I am not sure I figured out what it meant. I just knew what I felt when I saw you." "Which was?" He glanced at me sideways, like the floor tilted. "In a bad way?" "No," he said, "not in a bad way. In the way where something you have been bracing against stops pushing back and you realize the force you were exerting was the thing holding you in place." I walked alongside him and let that settle. "I was trying to provoke you," I said again, still slightly awed at my own bluntness in retrospect, "and instead you showed me something I was not ready to deal with in a professional context." He paused at a corner, waiting for the light, and in the amber of the street lamp he looked very much like the person I had been building toward for 14 months. Fully himself, fully present. "I have thought about the dress every day since the party." "Every day?" "Every day," he confirmed, without embarrassment. The light changed. We crossed. "That was not what I was going for," I told him. "What were you going for?" "An argument. A crack in the composure. Any evidence that I was getting to you." "You were getting to me," he said. "You have been getting to me since the second day. The composure was not unbothered, Kurt, it was just the only available professional option. We had arrived without particularly planning to at a park, the kind of city park that exists more as a formality than a destination, with a few benches and some trees making reasonable efforts and a path lit by the kind of lights that were warm enough to be kind. We sat on a bench, close enough that the outside of his knee was against the outside of mine. Neither of us moved away. "I want to tell you something," Tyler said. He was looking at the path ahead of us, which for him was usually a sign that he was working something out with care. "Go ahead," I said. "I have not had this easy," he said. "Connection, not in the general sense but the specific one. Not the being good with people version. I can do that. I have learned to do that. The real version. The one where you do not have to translate yourself." He paused. "I was worried, for a long time, that what I felt around you was mostly because you were the first person in a long time who I did not have to translate myself around. That the feeling was not about you specifically. That I was just relieved. And now?" I said. "And now," I said. "And now," he said, turning his head to look at me. "I know it is specifically you, because I have watched you think. And I have watched you care about things. And I have watched you be wrong, and not particularly enjoy it. And right and not particularly need anyone to notice. And you are not a feeling I borrowed. You are an argument I lost and then found I was glad to have lost." I looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very Tyler thing to say," I told him. "I hope that is acceptable. It is the most acceptable thing I have ever heard." He reached out and put his hand over mine on the bench, which he did slowly, in the way that careful people do things, leaving room for the object of the gesture to recalibrate. His hand was warm. I turned mine over and his fingers settled into mine with an ease that felt both new and entirely natural, the way things feel when they have been waiting. We sat there for a while. The city moved around us in its ordinary way, unhurried and indifferent to the fact that something had reorganized itself on a bench in a small park on an otherwise unremarkable evening. "The next time we are in a meeting," I said eventually, "and I say something pointed, I will tell you whether I agree," he said. "Not let it pass in dignified silence? Only if I find it particularly worthy of dignified silence," he said, and there was a warmth in his voice that I was already becoming addicted to, which will be rare. "Because you will argue with me now? Because," he said, "you are right more often than you let on, and it would be dishonest to let you perform on certainty you do not actually have." I stared at him. "You have been paying that much attention?" "Yes," he said simply. "I thought about all the meetings, all the project reviews, all the times I had made a point and then walked it back slightly, hedged it, softened it because I was not sure whether I was right or just confident, and Tyler had noticed the difference, had seen where the genuine certainty was and where the performance was. I have been paying that much attention too," I said, in case that was unclear. "It was always clear," he said. "I just was not sure what to do with it." "And now you are?" He squeezed my hand once gently and looked at me with that warm, undone expression that I had watched arrive for the first time in the office on Wednesday evening and that I intended with everything I had to see as often as possible for the foreseeable future. "Now I am," he said. "The dress is hanging in my wardrobe. I have looked at it on several occasions since the party with a kind of amused, slightly awed affection. I wore it to annoy Tyler Stokes. I wore it because I had spent 14 months trying to find the crack in his composure and had run out of subtler options. I wore it because wounded pride and accumulated feelings and 2 evenings of apartment circuits in black heels had converged on a decision that was not rational and turned out to be the truest thing I had done in the situation. What actually happened is this. Tyler told me later in the weeks that followed the party as we were doing the slow and not always graceful work of actually building something between us that the dress had not annoyed him. It had not irritated him. It had not produced the reaction I was aiming for. What it had produced, he said, was a kind of clarity, the way something you have been looking at with one eye suddenly lands in full focus when you turn your head just right. He had been managing, successfully, the feelings he had for me within the architecture of our professional life, keeping them on the appropriate side of the appropriate boundaries, being good at his job, being a good colleague, being the composed and considered version of himself that he had spent years developing. And then, I had walked into an office party in a midnight blue dress and looked like exactly myself, like the most concentrated possible version of the person he had been managing feelings about for over a year, and the architecture had simply not held. He had gone quiet because he was working out in real time that the management strategy was over, that he had arrived without planning to at the edge of the thing, and there was no professional scaffolding available to stand on. He had said my name at the catering table because it was all he had access to. He had looked at me once before he left because he needed to, in the simple way that people look at things they are trying to carry with them. I had worn a dress to find a crack in his composure. What I found instead was that the composure had been, all along, protecting something that had my name on it. This is the story I am telling because it is the true one, which is to say, it is messy and indirect and full of feelings labeled as other feelings and conversations that happened 3 steps later than they should have. It is the story of 2 people who communicated in the wrong language for over a year and then one evening, in an empty office with the cleaning crew working in the kitchen and the city going about its business outside, accidentally switched to the right one. Tyler, when I told him I was writing all of this down, read it with the careful attention he brings to everything I do, and then he said, with the warmth that is now so familiar to me, it feels like weather. I live inside. You left out the part where you said you loved me first. I included it, I said. You buried it in a subordinate clause. That is where I keep my most important information, I told him. In the subordinate clauses. You should know this by now. He gave me the look, the one I had been trying to read for 14 months and can now read perfectly clearly. It says, simultaneously, that I am something he finds exasperating and something he finds irreplaceable, and it says both things without apology. I love you, he said, not in a subordinate clause. Right in the main sentence, where the subject and the verb and the object are all present and accounted for. I know, I said. And, he said. And I love you, I told him, just as directly, which I have been doing for quite some time and which the dress was always really about, if we are being honest about it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the small and private smile, the one I have now had the privilege of learning is not particularly small or private at all, just saved for when something matters. I know, he said. The dress is still hanging in my wardrobe. I'm planning to wear it again. He already knows. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.